The first time the Mafia boss saw me, I was lying to a nurse about how much blood they'd already taken from my body. The fluorescent lights above the donation room buzzed like dying insects, flickering hard enough to make my headache worse. I stared at the faded ceiling tiles while the machine beside me hummed steadily, pulling dark red life through a thin tube wrapped around my arm. The nurse glanced down at the chart clipped to my cot and frowned. "Sophia, this is your second donation in 3 weeks." I forced a smile even though my lips felt numb. Bills don't really care about timing. She didn't laugh. Nobody at East River Community Clinic laughed much after midnight. Outside the tiny window near the ceiling, rain hammered against Manhattan like it wanted inside. The storm had been going for hours, turning the city into a blurry watercolor of headlights and reflections. Somewhere beyond those walls, people were still living normal lives, going on dates, sleeping in warm apartments, ordering overpriced takeout without calculating whether it would destroy next month's budget. Meanwhile, I was selling my blood to pay tuition for a nursing degree that suddenly felt impossible to finish. "You're pale," the nurse muttered. "You should rest before your shift starts." I almost laughed at that too. Rest, right. I worked mornings at the clinic reception desk, afternoons tutoring high school chemistry, and overnight inventory twice a week at a pharmacy in Queens. Sleep had become this mythical thing rich people talked about online next to candles and skincare routines. "I'm fine," I whispered. The lie tasted metallic in my mouth. 20 minutes later, I was sitting alone in the clinic bathroom pressing cold paper towels against the inside of my wrist where the needle mark still burned. My reflection looked worse under the harsh lighting, blonde hair falling out of a messy bun, skin too pale, green eyes surrounded by exhaustion dark enough to look bruised. 24 years old and already running on caffeine, debt and desperation. I checked my phone again even though I already knew the number waiting in my student account portal. $11,482 overdue. If I didn't pay at least part of it by Friday, I'd lose my enrollment for the spring semester. My stomach twisted so hard I leaned forward against the sink. "Keep going," I whispered to myself. "Just keep going." The clinic was nearly empty by 12:30 a.m. Only the emergency hallway lights remained on, casting everything in soft amber shadows. The vending machine near reception rattled every few minutes like it was haunted. Rainwater tapped against the windows. Somewhere down the hall, an old printer beeped endlessly because nobody had turned it off. I sat behind the front desk trying to stay awake while reviewing patient intake forms. My fingers trembled every time I typed. Too much blood gone. Not enough food. I could already feel tomorrow's dizziness waiting for me. That's when the power flickered, once, twice, then steadied again. I looked up slowly. Headlights cut through the rain outside the glass entrance doors. Black SUV, massive. Expensive enough to look unreal, parked outside our struggling little clinic. The engine idled for 3 long seconds before the driver's side door opened. Men stepped out first. Dark coats, broad shoulders, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavier. My pulse slowed instinctively. Something about them triggered every survival instinct I had. Then he appeared, tall. Dark hair slicked back from rain and wind, black wool coat hanging perfectly over a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my yearly tuition. Even through the storm, he moved with terrifying calm, like the weather itself avoided touching him. One of the rear doors opened and suddenly he was lifting a little boy into his arms. The child couldn't have been older than 7, pale skin, small body limp against the man's chest. My chair scraped hard against the floor as I stood up. "Oh my God." The words escaped before I could stop them. The man looked up at me through the glass doors, and for one impossible second, everything inside me went still. His eyes were the coldest shade of green I had ever seen. Not emotionless, worse, controlled. Like every dangerous thing in the world lived quietly behind them. The doors burst open. Rain and cold air flooded the lobby. One of the men barked, "We need a doctor." But the man holding the child never looked away from me. Water dripped slowly from his coat onto the white tile floor. The boy in his arms didn't move, and when the stranger finally spoke, his voice came out low enough to silence the entire room. "If he dies tonight," he said carefully, "I will too." For a second, nobody moved. Rain hissed against the clinic windows while cold air swept through the lobby carrying the scent of wet asphalt and expensive cologne. I finally forced my body to react. "Treatment room 3, I said quickly, already moving around the front desk. "Bring him now." The little boy looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights. Pale face, dark curls damp from rain, tiny fingers curled weakly against the black fabric of the man's coat. I pushed open the exam room door and motioned toward the bed. "Lay him down gently." The stranger obeyed immediately, but his eyes never left the child, not once. Men like him probably controlled entire rooms without speaking, but right then he looked like someone standing on the edge of losing everything. "What happened?" I asked while snapping gloves onto shaking hands. One of the suited men answered first. "High fever. He stopped responding 20 minutes ago. Did he hit his head?" "No." I looked up sharply. "I need information if you want me to help him." The man in the black coat finally spoke. "His name is Gabriel, 6 years old, no allergies. Fever started yesterday morning." His voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it now. I checked the boy's pulse. Weak, too weak. "Get me saline and the pediatric crash cart," I called toward the hallway. My co-worker Jenny rushed inside, looking half awake and completely terrified after noticing the men outside. "Sophia, now." She disappeared immediately. I leaned closer to the child, brushing damp curls away from his forehead, burning hot. His breathing came shallow and uneven. My own pulse started racing. We were a community clinic, not a hospital emergency room. We did not have specialists. We barely had enough funding to replace broken monitors. But the nearest hospital was almost 20 minutes away in this storm. The child did not have 20 minutes. "Gabriel," I said softly, "can you hear me?" No response. Behind me, the room felt too small because of the man watching everything I did. I could feel his attention like heat against my skin. Controlled, intense, dangerous. Jenny rushed back in, carrying supplies while I adjusted the oxygen line. My hands trembled slightly as I attached the monitor leads. Too much dizziness, too little iron. My body was already protesting from the blood donation earlier, but adrenaline forced me forward anyway. Fever, dehydration, exhaustion, possibly infection. "We need to bring his temperature down now," I muttered. "Cold compresses, fluids." "Stay with me, buddy." The little boy suddenly jerked weakly, letting out a small sound that made the man behind me step forward instantly. "Gabriel." The single word cracked slightly, barely noticeable, but I heard it. I looked up for the first time since we entered the room. "I need space to work." He froze. Most powerful men probably were not used to being ordered around by exhausted girls in cheap scrubs, but after one long second he stepped back without arguing. The room fell quiet except for rain and monitors. I inserted the IV carefully despite my shaking fingers. The moment blood flashed into the tubing, dizziness rolled through me so fast I had to steady myself against the edge of the bed. Nobody noticed except him. Of course he noticed. Those green eyes narrowed immediately. "You are pale," he said quietly. "I am fine." That was not a question. His voice lowered even further. "Sit down before you collapse." Something about the command irritated me enough to wake me up. "I am not collapsing in front of a patient." Jenny glanced nervously between us like she expected the walls to explode. The child stirred again. I focused on him instead. Minutes passed slowly after that. Cold towels, medication, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. The fever finally started dropping little by little. Not enough to relax, but enough that I could breathe again. Gabriel's tiny fingers moved weakly against the blanket. Then his eyes opened halfway. Relief hit the room so suddenly it almost felt physical. Jenny exhaled loudly behind me. One of the men outside muttered something under his breath. But the sound that stayed with me came from the stranger himself, a breath, sharp and uneven like he had forgotten how to breathe until that exact second. I looked over my shoulder. He stood motionless beside the wall, rainwater still dripping slowly from the edge of his coat onto the floor. But his eyes had changed. The terrifying coldness inside them had cracked just enough for me to glimpse something human underneath. Fear, real fear. Gabriel blinked weakly toward him. The man crossed the room immediately and took the child's small hand carefully in his own. His shoulders lowered for the first time since entering the clinic. "I am here," he said softly. "You are safe." I turned away to hide the strange tightness suddenly building in my chest. That was when my sleeve slipped down slightly, just enough to expose the fresh needle mark and bruising inside my wrist, and when I looked back up again, Luca Moretti was staring directly at it. The room suddenly felt too warm, too quiet. Luca Moretti's eyes stayed fixed on the inside of my wrist, while rain continued sliding down the clinic windows behind him in silver streaks. I tugged my sleeve down immediately. "It is nothing," I said too fast. His gaze lifted slowly back to my face. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at people. Not rude, not invasive, precise, like he noticed details other people missed and stored them somewhere permanent. "That bruise is fresh," he said quietly. "So?" "So you are shaking." I glanced down at my hands before curling them into fists. He was right. The tremor had gotten worse over the last 10 minutes. Adrenaline was fading now that Gabriel's breathing had stabilized, and exhaustion was rushing back twice as hard. I reached for the chart on purpose just to avoid those eyes. Children with high fevers can relapse fast. He needs monitoring tonight. I blinked. Excuse me, whatever this clinic requires. Equipment, medication, staff. You keep him here tonight. His tone carried the effortless certainty of someone used to solving problems with money before other people finished speaking. This is not a private hospital, I replied carefully. We cannot turn into one because you decided. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, more like surprise. People probably did not talk back to him often. Behind him, one of the suited men shifted uneasily near the doorway. Luca, he warned softly in Italian. Luca ignored him completely. Gabriel stirred again beneath the blanket, his small face still flushed from fever. I checked his pulse one more time while trying not to sway on my feet. The room tilted slightly anyway. The monitor lights blurred for half a second before snapping back into focus. I grabbed the edge of the bed harder than intended. Sophia Jenny's voice sharpened instantly. You look awful. I said I am fine, but my body betrayed me at the exact worst moment. A wave of dizziness crashed through me so violently that my knees nearly buckled. Before I hit the floor, a hand closed carefully around my arm. Strong, steady, warm despite the rain. Luca caught me like he had expected it to happen. Enough, he said quietly. Sit down. Do not order me around. Then consider it a request. His voice dropped lower. You cannot help anyone if you pass out. I hated that he sounded reasonable. Jenny pushed a chair toward me while giving me the kind of look nurses reserve for stubborn patients. Sit before I force you. Reluctantly, I lowered myself into the chair beside Gabriel's bed. The moment I stopped moving, exhaustion slammed into me fully. My pulse echoed inside my skull. My stomach burned from too much coffee and not enough food. Luca crouched slightly beside the counter across from me, loosening the wet cuffs of his coat with controlled movements. Even exhausted, I noticed details automatically. Expensive watch, faint scar near his jawline, broad shoulders filling the black shirt beneath his coat. But none of that felt as intimidating as the silence around him. The other men watched him constantly, waiting for reactions before breathing themselves. You sold blood today. It was not a question. I looked up sharply. That is none of your business. You almost collapsed treating my son. He is not your son. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Something flickered across his expression, tiny, fast, but real. Who told you that? He asked quietly. I glanced toward Gabriel sleeping under the blanket. The way you look at him. Luca stared at the child for several seconds before answering. I made a promise to someone important. The room fell silent again. Rain monitor beeps, distant thunder rolling through Manhattan. Then Gabriel shifted weakly beneath the blanket and whispered something too soft to hear. Luca moved instantly to the bedside, not with fear this time, gentleness. He brushed damp hair carefully from the little boy's forehead with a tenderness that did not belong to the terrifying man who walked into the clinic earlier, and suddenly I understood something dangerous. Monsters did not look at children like that. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I stood slowly despite the dizziness and adjusted the IV line again. He should wake up more by morning if the fever keeps dropping. Luca looked at me over Gabriel's bed. And what happens to you by morning? What does that mean? You are exhausted, malnourished, and desperate enough to sell your own blood. His eyes lowered briefly toward the cheap sneakers peeking out beneath my scrubs. People do not reach that point unless they are alone. The words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because they were true, I forced myself to look away first. You do not know anything about me, no, Luca said softly. But I want to. By 4 in the morning, the storm outside had softened into steady rain, the kind that turned Manhattan into a city of reflections and silence. Gabriel finally slept peacefully beneath warm blankets while the fever monitor blinked stable numbers beside him. Jenny had gone home an hour earlier after triple-checking that I promised not to faint before sunrise. I lied to her too. My entire body ached now, the blood donation, the stress, the 12-hour shift that had somehow become 16. Every muscle felt hollow. I stood near the coffee machine in the empty hallway trying to force myself awake with burnt coffee that tasted like bitter smoke. The clinic lights buzzed overhead while tired jazz music played softly through the old ceiling speakers. Somewhere outside, a siren echoed through wet streets before fading into the distance. New York never truly slept, it just suffered quietly at different hours. You look like you hate that coffee. I nearly dropped the cup. Lucas stood at the end of the hallway, one hand in the pocket of his dark slacks, the other holding his phone loosely at his side. Without the soaked coat and urgency from earlier, he somehow looked even more dangerous now, calm instead of desperate, controlled instead of frantic. The kind of man newspapers warned women about. You walk quietly, I muttered. You were distracted. He stepped closer, expensive shoes silent against the tile floor. You should eat something. You sound very invested in my health for someone who met me 3 hours ago. His answer came immediately, like that explained everything. Maybe to him it did. I took another sip of terrible coffee just to avoid his eyes. He would have survived anyway. No, his voice lowered slightly. He would not have. The certainty in his tone made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Luca leaned one shoulder lightly against the wall across from me. Up close. Exhaustion touched him too now that the panic had faded. Faint shadows beneath green eyes. Slight tension near his jaw. He had probably not slept either. Men like him likely carried entire worlds on their backs. Dangerous worlds. Who are you really? I asked before I could stop myself. Rain tapped softly against the windows nearby. Luca studied me carefully, like he was deciding how much truth I could survive. A businessman. I almost laughed. That answer alone sounds illegal. To my surprise, something flickered across his face again, that almost smile from earlier. Tiny. You are not afraid of me. I should be? Most people are. His honesty caught me off guard. I looked down into the dark coffee swirling inside my cup. You brought a sick child into a free clinic in the middle of a thunderstorm and looked terrified the entire time. My voice softened before I meant it to. It is hard to fear someone after seeing that. Luca stared at me for a long moment without speaking. The air between us shifted strangely. Not romantic, not safe either, just real, and maybe that was more dangerous than either of those things. His phone buzzed suddenly in his hand. The expression on his face changed instantly after reading the screen. Colder, sharper, like steel sliding back into place. I need to take this, he said quietly. He stepped a few feet away, but not far enough for me to miss the tension in his voice. He spoke Italian too quickly for me to understand, more than fragments. Problem, delay, protect him. His shoulders tightened more with every sentence. Whatever world he came from, it clearly did not sleep either. When he ended the call, silence filled the hallway again. Everything okay? I asked automatically. Luca looked at me like nobody had asked him that question in years. No, he admitted softly, but it will be. Something about the answer felt lonely. I hated that I noticed. He glanced toward the treatment room where Gabriel slept. I have to leave for a few hours. My stomach tightened unexpectedly at the words. Ridiculous. I barely knew this man. The clinic opens at 7, I said instead. He can stay until then. Luca nodded once. Then his eyes moved toward my locker near the nurse's station across the hall. Which one is yours? I frowned immediately. Why? Humor me. That sounds suspicious. Sophia. The way he said my name should not have affected me. Low, controlled, careful, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. I pointed reluctantly toward the dented grey locker at the far end of the station. Luca nodded once, like he had memorized the information permanently. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out black leather gloves. Get some sleep if you can, he said while putting them on slowly. People say that to exhausted women like sleep is free. His eyes held mine for one dangerous second too long. Maybe it should be. Then he turned and walked toward the clinic exit with the same quiet authority he entered with earlier. The men outside straightened instantly the moment they saw him. Rain blew through the opening doors as the black SUV engines started one by one outside. I stood frozen beside the bad coffee long after he disappeared into the storm, and somehow against all logic the clinic suddenly felt emptier without him in it. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee by 7:30 in the morning. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving Manhattan wrapped in cold grey light and puddles that reflected skyscrapers like broken mirrors. I had not slept, not even for 5 minutes. Gabriel woke up around 6, asking quietly for apple juice, while his fever continued dropping steadily, and somehow that tiny raspy voice felt like victory after the night we survived. I sat at the nurse's station finishing discharge paperwork while fighting the exhaustion pulling at every part of my body. My student portal notification still glowed angrily on my phone screen beside the keyboard. Final Norta. Payment required. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened harder. You need to go home. Jenny dropped a granola bar beside my elbow before hanging her coat inside the supply closet. You look legally deceased. That is dramatic. Sophia, your mascara is under your eyes. I froze instantly and reached for my reflection in the dark computer monitor. She was right. I looked terrible, pale skin, messy blonde hair escaping my bun completely now. Shadows beneath my eyes dark enough to belong in a horror movie. Rough night? One of the morning nurses asked while clocking in. Jenny snorted before I could answer. A mysterious billionaire and his terrifying bodyguards basically turned this place into Gotham City at midnight. Jenny. What? I am just saying. She lowered her voice dramatically. The hot, scary one looked at her like she personally invented oxygen. Heat climbed unexpectedly into my face. Nobody looked at me like that, sure. I grabbed the granola bar just to throw it lightly at her shoulder. She laughed while walking away toward triage. By 8:15, Gabriel had been picked up by a private pediatric specialist Luca arranged before sunrise. The little boy hugged me tightly before leaving, still sleepy beneath his tiny navy sweater. "Thank you, Sophia," he whispered. I watched the black SUVs disappear down the wet street afterward while something strange settled quietly inside my chest. Relief maybe, or disappointment. Both felt dangerous. The clinic finally returned to normal after that. Phones ringing non-stop. Patients complaining about wait times. Insurance paperwork stacked like mountains behind reception. Real life rushing back in hard enough to almost convince me the night before had not happened at all. Almost. Around noon, I finally opened my locker to grab aspirin for the headache splitting my skull in half. That was when I saw the envelope. Thick cream-colored paper sitting directly on top of my folded scrubs. No name written outside. No stamp. Nothing. My stomach tightened immediately. Slowly, I picked it up and opened the flap. Thick stacks of them. I stopped breathing for a second. There had to be at least $20,000 inside, maybe more. My hands started shaking instantly. What the hell? I looked around the empty locker room even though I already knew. Who else would leave enough money to change someone's entire life inside a free clinic locker? My tuition, rent, food, everything. The pressure crushing my chest for months suddenly had a number attached to it now, and somehow that made it worse. I stared at the money while memories flashed rapidly through my mind. Selling blood yesterday afternoon. Crying quietly in the subway bathroom last week because my debit card declined for groceries. Pretending not to hear collectors calling during class lectures. One envelope could erase all of it. One decision. My fingers tightened around the edge of the locker. No, absolutely not. I shoved the envelope back together too fast and marched toward the front desk where Jenny was sorting patient files. Did someone come by earlier? She blinked up at me. Besides 12 angry New Yorkers and a guy yelling because we do not validate parking. Jenny. Her expression changed immediately after seeing my face. What happened? I lowered my voice. Did Luca Moretti come back here? The silence that followed answered everything. Jenny's eyes widened slowly. Okay, first of all, that man has a full movie star name, Jenny. Second of all, maybe one of the scary security guys dropped off coffee for the staff this morning. My stomach sank. And your mysterious emotionally damaged billionaire apparently asked where your locker was. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. Sophia. Jenny's voice softened now. What is going on? I held up the envelope slightly. Her jaw dropped open immediately. Oh my God, his address. You are returning it? Yes. Are you insane? Probably. She stared at the money one more time before whispering, that is more money than my car costs. It is not mine. Maybe he wants it to be. I looked back down at the envelope in my hands. Heavy, life-changing, dangerous. Then I remembered the way Luca looked at me in that hallway earlier. Calm, certain, like he had already decided something about me before I even understood it myself. My pulse quickened suddenly because deep down I knew this was not charity, and somehow that scared me more. My feet hurt so badly it felt like walking on broken glass. The city outside had turned gold with sunset reflections. Traffic lights glowing against wet pavement while Manhattan rushed toward another sleepless night. I stood outside a luxury high-rise on the Upper East Side clutching the cream-colored envelopes so tightly the edges bent beneath my fingers. The doorman looked me up and down once. Cheap coat, canvas tote bag, tired eyes. Definitely not someone who belonged near a building where the windows probably cost more than my apartment. Can I help you? He asked politely enough. I need to see Luca Moretti. The man's expression changed instantly. Tiny, controlled, but noticeable. Do you have an appointment? No, then I am afraid Mr. Moretti is unavailable. I held up the envelope. Tell him Sophia Mitchell is here. The doorman froze for half a second before quietly stepping aside toward the reception desk. He picked up the phone immediately. That alone told me everything I needed to know about Luca's world. Men like him did not need introductions. They needed clearance. 5 minutes later, I was riding an elevator lined with dark, polished wood and soft jazz music that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My reflection stared back at me from mirrored walls. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail after a 14-hour shift. Green sweater with bleach stains near the sleeve. Exhaustion carved into every inch of me. I looked painfully ordinary compared to wherever I was going. The elevator opened directly into a private penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan glowing beneath the darkening sky like a sea of diamonds. Soft lighting reflected off black marble floors. Everything smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive whiskey. Quiet, controlled, beautiful in a cold way. Luca stood near the windows with one hand in his pocket, speaking softly into his phone in Italian. He wore a charcoal dress shirt rolled at the sleeves now, exposing strong forearms and a silver watch catching city light. The moment he saw me, he ended the call immediately. Sophia. My name sounded different in his apartment somehow, more dangerous. You left this in my locker. I held out the envelope before my courage disappeared completely. Luca glanced down at it but made no move to take it. Yes, take it back. No. Irritation flashed through me instantly. You cannot just hand people $20,000. Actually, I can. That is not the point. He studied me quietly for a second before walking closer. Even barefoot on polished marble, I still felt small around him. Not because of height, presence. Luca carried silence the way other men carried weapons. You needed help, he said simply. You barely know me. No, you do not. My voice sharpened before I could stop it. You saw one terrible night of my life and decided to play hero. His eyes darkened slightly at that word. Hero. Somehow it sounded wrong attached to him. You sold blood to stay in school, he said quietly. You treated Gabriel while half conscious, and even after everything, your first instinct was to return the money instead of keeping it. He stepped closer still. That tells me more about you than most people reveal in years. My pulse stumbled once against my ribs. I hated that part of me reacted every time he looked directly at me like that. Seen, completely. I cannot owe you something like this, I whispered. Luca's gaze softened just slightly. Then do not think of it as debt. Silence stretched between us, while city lights flickered behind him. Then he answered carefully, an investment. Into what? Your future. The words landed somewhere dangerous inside my chest. I looked away first, focusing on the skyline beyond the windows. Tiny yellow taxis crawled through Manhattan below like moving stars. Somewhere down there were overdue bills, subway delays, ramen noodles for dinner, and classmates pretending not to panic about student loans. This apartment felt like another planet entirely. People like you do not do things for free, I said softly. People like me. I turned back toward him. Rich men with security teams and private elevators. One side of Luca's mouth moved slightly again. That almost smamaged. Heat rushed unexpectedly into my face. Jenny talks too much. I liked her immediately. I laughed before I could stop myself. Actual laughter. Short and surprised and real. Luca went completely still afterward. The room changed instantly. His expression did not shift much, but something in his eyes did. Like hearing me laugh mattered more than it should have. The realization unsettled both of us at the same time. I cleared my throat quickly and pushed the envelope toward him again. I still cannot take it. Luca looked down at the money briefly before meeting my eyes again. Then let me ask you something honestly, Sophia. His voice lowered slightly. If your situation were reversed tonight, if I was the one drowning and you had the ability to help me, would you? I opened my mouth immediately, then stopped, because we both already knew the answer. Yes, of course I would. Luca stepped closer one final time, gently closing my fingers back around the envelope. His hand brushed mine briefly, warm, steady, dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with fear anymore. Then stop punishing yourself for needing help, he said softly. The world already does that enough. 3 days later, I still had not decided what terrified me more, the envelope full of money sitting untouched inside my apartment drawer, or the fact that I kept thinking about the man who gave it to me. Manhattan moved normally around me while my life quietly tilted off balance. Subway brakes screamed underground. Steam rose from street vents into cold October air. Students hurried across campus carrying coffee cups and exhaustion like survival kits. But every time my phone buzzed unexpectedly, my pulse reacted before my brain did. It was ridiculous. Luca never called, never texted. Somehow that made it worse, because despite disappearing back into whatever dangerous world he came from, he had not truly disappeared at all. Things around me started changing too quietly to ignore. The broken heater in my apartment building suddenly got repaired after tenants complained for 6 months. Mrs. Delgado downstairs cried while hugging the maintenance guy because her arthritis could finally survive the winter. My landlord stopped sending eviction warnings taped to my door. Even stranger, the owner of the pharmacy where I worked overnight inventory suddenly apologized for cutting employee hours and offered me extra shifts at higher pay. Corporate restructuring, he explained awkwardly while avoiding eye contact. Funny how fast things change, huh? Funny indeed. By Friday night, I sat behind the clinic reception desk, staring suspiciously at a brand new espresso machine someone had anonymously donated that morning. Jenny sipped iced coffee beside me and narrowed her eyes dramatically. Your terrifying rich boyfriend is definitely laundering affection through this clinic. I nearly choked on my water. He is not my boyfriend. Then why does our waiting room suddenly have imported Italian coffee? Maybe somebody donated it. Sophia. She leaned closer over the desk. The machine cost more than my car. Before I could answer, the clinic doors opened quietly. Cold evening air swept inside, carrying rain and city noise with it, and suddenly every thought in my head stopped. Luca walked in wearing a black wool coat over dark slacks, one hand resting lightly against Gabriel's shoulder as the little boy stepped inside beside him. The fluorescent lobby lights reflected softly against Luca's dark hair, while tired New Yorkers in the waiting room instinctively moved aside without understanding why. Some people carried authority naturally. Luca carried something heavier. The room itself seemed to adjust around me first. His entire face lit up immediately. Sophia, I smiled before I could stop myself. Hey you. The little boy rushed toward the desk, holding up a piece of folded paper proudly. I made this for you. My chest tightened as I unfolded the drawing carefully. Crayon sketches filled the page. A tiny blonde stick figure beside a much taller dark-haired one holding umbrellas in the rain. Beneath them, crooked childish handwriting read, "Thank you for saving me. Gabriel." My voice softened automatically. This is beautiful. Luca watched the interaction quietly from a few feet away, hands tucked into his coat pockets. There was exhaustion in his eyes again tonight, but less fear, more peace. Somehow that realization affected me more than it should have. His fever stayed down, Luca said softly, once Gabriel wandered toward the vending machine. Good. He wanted to come back. I folded the drawing carefully against my chest. So this is not another medical emergency? No. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. Apparently I was ordered to bring him to visit the nice clinic lady. Heat crept unexpectedly into my face. Gabriel returned moments later carrying grape juice and immediately climbed into one of the waiting room chairs near my desk like he belonged there. The child already looked healthier, more alive. It hit me suddenly that I had not realized how tense I stayed since the night I met them until this exact moment, seeing him smile. Luca noticed my expression immediately. Of course he did. You worry too much, he murmured quietly. Occupational hazard. No. His eyes held mine for one dangerous second too long. It is personal with you. My heartbeat stumbled hard enough to annoy me. Jenny appeared beside the copier nearby and mouthed silently at me behind Luca's back. Oh my God. I ignored her completely. Mostly because if I acknowledged her, I would start laughing, and if I laughed around Luca again, he would look at me that way again too, like hearing joy from me mattered more than anything else in the room. Gabriel suddenly tugged lightly at Luca's sleeve. Can Sophia come draw with me? Luca glanced down at the little boy before looking back at me carefully, like he already knew saying no would disappoint both of them. Only for 5 minutes, I sighed. Gabriel grinned triumphantly while dragging crayons toward the pediatric corner. I sat cross-legged beside him on the faded carpet moments later while helping him sketch superheroes badly. The entire time I could feel Luca watching quietly from nearby. Not possessive, not controlling, worse somehow, protective. Like he had started seeing me as something fragile worth guarding, and deep down, that frightened me more than his money ever could. 2 weeks passed before the illusion finally cracked. Long enough for Luca Moretti to become part of my routine in ways that should have terrified me more than they did. Some nights he stopped by the clinic with Gabriel after dinner, just to let the little boy color quietly beside my desk while I finished paperwork. Other nights, I caught sight of a black SUV parked across the street when my shift ended after midnight. Never too close, never obvious, just there watching, waiting until I safely disappeared into my apartment building before driving away again. I never mentioned it. Neither did he. That somehow made it more intimate. The city had turned colder by November. Wind funneled hard through Manhattan streets, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from food carts and smoke from subway grates. My life should have felt lighter now that the tuition notice stopped haunting me every morning. Luca's envelope still sat untouched inside my dresser drawer, but somehow the universe around me kept softening anyway. Anonymous donations appeared at the clinic. My work schedule became easier. One afternoon I even found groceries delivered outside my apartment door with no note attached except fresh strawberries tucked carefully beside the bags. Nobody had ever paid attention to the tiny things I liked before. That realization stayed with me longer than it should have. Friday night arrived with freezing rain tapping softly against clinic windows while old Christmas songs played quietly from the reception speakers. Gabriel sat beside me building crooked towers dung depressors while I updated patient charts. Luca stood nearby speaking low Italian into his phone, dark coat still dusted with rain from outside. "No delays," he said sharply into the receiver. "I want confirmation tonight." His voice carried a coldness I almost forgot existed around me now. The shift unsettled me unexpectedly. Before I could think too hard about why, the waiting room television suddenly changed from holiday commercials to breaking news. Tonight's developing story involves businessman Luca Moretti, who was seen leaving a downtown charity gala just hours before federal investigators connected his shipping company to an ongoing organized crime investigation. My entire body froze instantly. On screen, blurry camera footage showed Luca stepping from a black SUV surrounded by men in dark suits. Reporters shouted questions while camera flashes exploded around him. The caption beneath the footage read, "Alleged Underwood figure linked to Mortity Screefing Empire." Blood drained slowly from my face. Gabriel looked up from the floor innocently. "That is Luca." I could not breathe for a second. The reporter continued talking over footage of luxury buildings, police barricades, and grainy photos of men I did not recognize. Words like criminal organization, dangerous associates. My pulse roared louder with every sentence. Luca ended his phone call immediately the moment he noticed the television. The room changed instantly. Every ounce of warmth vanished from his expression as he grabbed the remote from the counter and muted the screen. Silence crashed down around us. Gabriel blinked between us in confusion. "Sophia?" I stood slowly from behind the desk. "What is this?" Luca's jaw tightened once. "Media speculation." That did not look like speculation. People say many things about powerful men. Are they true? The question slipped out sharper than I intended. Gabriel sensed the tension immediately and went quiet beside the toy bin. Luca noticed too. He lowered his voice carefully. "Not here. Then where?" My heart pounded painfully against my ribs now. Memories rushed through my head all at once. Security teams. The terrifying silence around him. Men stepping aside instinctively wherever he walked. Somehow I hated myself for not putting it together sooner. "Sophia, no." I shook my head once, stepping backward. "You let me believe you were some mysterious businessman when people on television are calling you a criminal." Something dangerous flickered across Luca's face then. Not anger, hurt, real hurt. "I never lied to you. You absolutely omitted important details. Because this world has nothing to do with you. Apparently it does now." Rain hit harder against the clinic windows while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. Gabriel moved quietly closer toward Luca's side, small fingers gripping his coat sleeve nervously. The sight twisted something painful inside my chest, because despite everything flashing across the television screen moments earlier, the child trusted him completely, and deep down, part of me still did too. That frightened me most of all. Luca looked at me for a long silent moment before speaking again, softer this time. "You should go home early tonight. Do not decide things for me. Sophia." His voice lowered dangerously. "Please." The word stopped me cold. Men like Luca Moretti probably never begged for anything. Yet they're odd, controlled, human. My chest tightened painfully. I looked away first toward the muted television still showing his face beside bold headlines and flashing cameras. Two versions of him suddenly existed in my mind now. The terrifying man the city whispered about, and the one who sat on clinic floors helping Gabriel color superheroes because it made the child smile. I did not know which version was real anymore. Luca watched me carefully, like every fear unraveling inside me. Then very softly, almost too quietly to hear, he said the words that shattered me completely. "You are looking at me differently now." The clinic felt unbearably small after that. Rain tapped against the windows while muted headlines continued flashing Luca's face across the television screen behind me like a warning I should have seen coming all along. Organized crime investigation. Federal inquiry. Dangerous associates. The words echoed inside my head louder than the storm outside. Gabriel sat quietly in the pediatric corner, clutching his crayons now, watching both of us with wide, uncertain eyes. I hated that he was old enough to notice tension but too young to understand it. Luca stood near the reception desk completely motionless, black coat still damp from rain, one hand resting loosely near his pocket, calm on the outside, but his eyes had changed again, harder now. like walls sliding back into place after being lowered around me by mistake. Say something, he said quietly. I folded my arms tightly across my chest just to stop myself from shaking. What exactly am I supposed to say? Whatever you are thinking. I laughed once under my breath. Not because anything was funny, because I suddenly felt stupid. I think I do not know who you are anymore. Something sharp crossed his expression before disappearing. You know exactly who I am when I am here. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. His voice stayed calm, but frustration lived underneath it now. Controlled frustration, the dangerous kind. I looked toward the television again, where another blurry photo of Luca filled the screen beside scrolling headlines. People do not put your face on the news unless something is very wrong. The news profits from fear. Do not do that. Do what? Talk in circles like I am too naive to understand what everyone else already does. Silence settled heavily between us. Even the waiting room felt quieter somehow, like the entire clinic sensed something breaking open. Luca looked away first toward Gabriel. The little boy had stopped coloring completely now, small shoulders tense beneath his sweater. Luca crossed the room immediately and crouched beside him. Hey, his voice softened instantly. Why do not you draw me another terrible superhero? Gabriel glanced nervously between us. Are you mad? Luca's expression changed so fast it hurt to watch. Gentleness replacing steel in seconds. Never at you. The child relaxed slightly after that and returned slowly to his crayons. I stared at Luca in stunned silence. Men like him should not know how to sound that gentle. He stood again afterward. But this time he looked tired instead of intimidating. Truly tired. Sophia, he said quietly, come outside with me. Why? Because I do not want this conversation happening in front of him. I hesitated for 2 painful seconds before grabbing my coat from behind the desk. Cold air hit my face immediately once we stepped outside into the alley beside the clinic. Rain misted softly through yellow streetlights while traffic hissed across wet pavement nearby. Manhattan smelled like winter and smoke and exhaustion. Luca stood beneath the awning with both hands in his coat pockets, watching the rain instead of me. I should have told you sooner, he admitted finally. The honesty caught me off guard. Then why did you not? Because I liked the way you looked at me before. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Luca laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what most people see when they hear my name? He asked quietly. Power, money, fear. His eyes lifted slowly toward mine. You saw Gabriel. Something painful shifted inside me. I hated that his words mattered. The things they are saying on television. I swallowed hard. Are they true? Luca stayed silent long enough to answer anyway. Rainwater slid slowly from the edge of the awning between us. Somewhere down the street, a taxi honked angrily into the night. Finally, he spoke. My world is complicated. That sounds like a yes. It sounds like survival. His voice lowered. There are businesses connected to my name, men connected to me, some dangerous, some loyal, most both. He stepped slightly closer, but nothing you saw with Gabriel was fake. I looked down at my trembling hands instead of him. Because that was the problem. I believed him. You should have let me decide whether I wanted this around me. I tried to stay away. His answer came instantly. After that first night, I told myself I would pay your tuition and disappear. My pulse stumbled painfully. Then why did you not? Lucas stared at me with an expression so raw it almost frightened me more than anger would have. Because every time I left the clinic, his voice roughened slightly before he finished quietly, I kept finding reasons to come back. The confession settled heavily between us. Honest, dangerous, real. I looked away toward the rain-slick street because suddenly breathing felt difficult. Luca stepped closer one final time. Close enough that I could smell cedarwood and cold winter air clinging to his coat. You are disappointed, he said softly. That is worse than fear. His eyes searched mine carefully like he was bracing for rejection before it arrived. Everyone else looks at me like I am dangerous. A pause, quiet enough to hurt. You looked at me like I could still be good.